Ashley Gattuso. I'm joined here today by Peter Cooper of Cooperpress. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of the many development-related newsletters that Cooperpress publishes. There's actually, we think, a baker's dozen, around 13 or so, that are active. And he has been doing this how long? When did you launch Cooperpress?
It feels like a lifetime, but yeah, the company was founded in 2011, but I began very, very slightly before that. So there was a slight transition period from being independent to company.
Cool. So you were doing newsletters kind of before they were cool this go around. I won't say that before they were cool ever, because I feel like we see like an ebb and flow or a cyclical like cycle of the popularity of newsletters as a genre, and then them being bought up and bundled into larger media groups. So did you start with a media group or like one newsletter? Like, what's your backstory for Cooperpress?
So I won't go too far to my childhood or anything like that, but you know, I've always been interested in online media. I ran what was called a fanzine back online on news groups back in the mid-90s about programming. And that was just, you know, something I just did for fun as a teenager. You know, it wasn't a business or anything like that, just something I did for fun. I've always been interested in producing information and sharing it online in some way or another. That eventually turned into blogging in the early 2000s. And I began a blog because I was approached to write a book about programming in Ruby, which is a programming language. And I was approached to do that. And I just kind of had this idea that this was a thing at the time, which was if you've got something that you want to build in public, then begin a blog and blog about it, and people will come along for the ride. And now, you know, people use Twitter accounts for the same kind of ends. You know,
Right.
They'll build in public there or on a live stream or something, but blogging was the thing. So I built up this Ruby blog, which was ostensibly to promote the book, but kind of became bigger in its own right because it was about news to do with this programming language. And after running that for, you know, several years, having sponsorships and stuff like that, it became the biggest blog in the Ruby space. And just some stuff that I was seeing happen with email at the time. So there was a guy called Jason Baptiste who was pretty big on Hacker News, and he did these blog posts about how there was like this renaissance of email. And he was looking at companies like Groupon and Living Social and Help a Reporter Out. And there were a whole bunch of things at the time that were either email newsletters, or they used email as like the main medium to communicate with a buyer, for example. So, you know, Groupon, which, you know, it still feels like it's there for me, but I guess it's kind of not anymore. But, you know, allowed you to kind of get these deals and stuff. And they would email you each day with the deal.
I remember the Groupon craze. I was a young mom at the time. So it was like, we could get discounts to go to the Cartwheels and coffee shop and things along that line. Yeah.
But you kind of saw that happening. So it was like, suddenly email has become the center of something and is actually like a really good deliverability mechanism, essentially. Like this is how to send stuff to people. And I thought, hang on, I'm doing this news. Like, what if I send it to them via email instead? And so I managed to overnight get about 1,800 subscribers because I had so many like RSS subscribers to the email, to the RSS feed and the blog, that they came straight onto the email. And I was like, okay, interesting. And that's where it began. So that's where, you know, the beginning of Ruby Weekly was, and it went from there and there.
Do you think that at that point in our experience with email, we were more apt to subscribe to a thing than we might be now? I feel like there wasn't a saturation in your inbox at that point, and you could go, yeah, I'll get a daily that, or sure, I'll take that once a month or once a week.
Exactly.
I'd love for you to kind of show the Cooperpress website and then move into the back end of how you evolved into putting all of this together. But I think that what I'm getting from your historical talk is like you were blogging and email became a hot, and I will say it is still hot, distribution channel for the content that you were putting together. And so suddenly your audience had a chance to be reminded of the thing they wanted to get from you. They don't have to go find it or go to their RSS feed anymore. They can get it in their email, which now people are like, I kind of think I need an RSS feed again. My email's
Yeah. Although, that said, there are so many people that actually subscribe to our publications via RSS, and that's something we've always featured on the front page, is that just because of our audience are developers, they're more likely to use RSS than perhaps, a general audience would be. So it's something that has been demanded and is valued, and people, email us and say, oh, thankfully you do this, because, I wouldn't subscribe otherwise. I just don't like getting too many emails. So
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody listen to that strategy. You might need a way for people to just go ahead and do that and not worry
Depends
so
on the
much
audience.
about. Yeah.
I mean, you could make it a pay for thing potentially. Like if you've got an audience that is eager enough to be, about privacy and this, that, and the other, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be tracked, I just want to get everything through RSS. Could you get them into your community? Could you say, look, RSS is a feature of some sort of back end thing? Maybe there's a potential there.
You can make it like the Clubhouse of your newsletter.
So RSS is the next new fad. We've done email, now we're back to RSS.
All right, we're about to launch this new old thing again. RSS.
Yes. Let's see if I can share this second screen of mine.
Excellent.
Mentioned. So I never ever use screen sharing on Zoom. So this is very new to me.
We will give you grace.
Is this working?
It's working.
Fantastic.
It's working. So first of all, I want everyone to pay attention to that branding because you have such a nice word mark. And like, what kind of bird is this? Is this, I feel like it's between a Twitter bird and an owl. So I'm curious what I'm really looking at.
It's meant to be an owl.
Okay.
Yeah, it was designed by we had a graphic designer on staff actually very early on, which was a slightly unusual thing to have. We haven't now, but yeah, they designed this. So
great branding. I see you using it on social in some places, and I appreciate it. So
yeah, it's weird actually. Like I never ever look at this site, and it was recently redesigned by someone on our team called Chris, and he also runs an email newsletter on his spare time. So we've kind of got the right staff, you see. But yeah, I mean, I don't tend to point people to this because this is not how I.
Okay.
I'm kind of like one of those builders that neglects their own home. It's just for me, like a homepage is just almost like a courtesy. It's something that people look up just to make sure we're a real company. But in terms of, I don't drive subscribers here at all. This is really for people that are going to sponsor us to just see that we're real.
Yes. So it's like, it's proof of professionalism. It's the same thing I think sometimes happens with agencies. Like the really good design agencies are always so busy working for other people that their website sometimes tends to get outdated because they don't have the bandwidth to put towards their own website if they've got enough word of mouth going on based on the things they're building. So JavaScript
this is more like where I want people to go, which is the actual landing page or the homepage for one of the newsletters, this is our biggest one, JavaScript Weekly. And they all follow a very, very similar format to this. I'm not going to keep this one on the screen, but as you can see, the Ruby one is very, very similar. And that was the first one. So we're 534 issues now. But the JavaScript one is the biggest one. And they've followed this kind of format for, like at least 5 or 6 years now. We did have a slightly different format early on, but now they all kind of have this live preview down the right and links to the RSS, and here's what you type in to subscribe to things on the left. So yeah, they all follow this same format. And we've noticed people over the years, some people have been inspired by this and taken on a very similar look, but it's just what it's about. Like whenever anyone puts a new look up, like Stripe puts a new homepage up, everyone kind of follows the same model as them because it works. So we're kind of in a similar position with this, and yeah.
So it's important. I think it's important then right now to note that although it has not aired and been pushed public, that I took a moment to interview Dave Verwer, who is the founder of Curated, a few weeks ago, like right before the Christmas holiday. And he has his 500th issue of iOS Dev Weekly coming out. And we had a great conversation about like the inception of that. And it was interesting to hear his insights. Oh, you've got it pulled up.
There he is.
And I think it's like a testament to your respect for each other that I have engaged with you via the newsletter creator group or elsewhere on social media, and that you both have such wonderful things to say about each other. And so when I was talking to him about iOS Dev Weekly, he was like, well, I give a lot of credit to Peter Cooper and what he has done with his development newsletters in that group. And so I see some shadows of what you both saw as an appealing format when these were coming about in his work and in what Curated produces, which according to him has a lot to do with what you were being successful with at the time. So
yeah.
I know that on occasion when I have shared his newsletter that you have always been sure to like chime in and say like, this is Dave, he's kind of shy about his stuff, but he did a great job kind of thing. So we're giving him a little applause right now in your interview because he gave you plenty in his.
Yeah, he kind of alluded actually in that interview to when we had a phone call, and must admit, it's probably the last time we actually did have a phone call together. And he was like, I'm thinking of taking this curated tool and, taking it from just being my thing to being more of a platform thing, like something I sell to people. I know. Yeah. So like he kind of took a very different approach to me, whereas he was saying, you're going to do the same with your tools. And I was like, no, I'm more interested in being a publisher. I'm more interested in the newsletter and putting stuff together into the newsletter and publishing numerous different newsletters than I am selling a tool to a group of other newsletter producers, which is you can choose which way to go. It's no way is better than the other, but I'm just not interested in having customers and dealing with that angle of it. It just
You
works
want a
better for me this
publishing
way.
tool, not a SaaS tool that is B2B. Like you want to have built it and use it for to inspire others.
Yeah, and the problem is, it probably wouldn't have even been B2B in the end. It would have been like B2C, I think, because so many people are running newsletters independently now outside of their company that, I just think it would be a hard sell, which, was my decision at the time. And we went our different ways, and it's worked out for both of us, which is pretty good.
Yes. Okay, so we're looking at the most popular of the Cooperpress newsletters, JavaScript Weekly.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of walk me through the format, the decisions behind the format, and then I'd love to get like a little bit under the hood of where the content comes from and how you juggle pulling quality content for multiple newsletters on what I'm assuming is mostly a weekly basis.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10. So this is a pretty run-of-the-mill kind of issue, actually. We do change up the content sections in different issues from time to time. We mix in interviews and breakout content blocks and stuff like that. But this is actually, I've just deliberately gone back to this issue because it's quite a, not to sound too boring, but kind of dry issue in a way. Like this is the basic format that we've run for quite some time. So basically, the way we do it is we nearly always have an image at the top now, which is a decision I made a few years back when I saw more people begin to produce newsletters like this, is I always want to have something a little bit different to everyone else. And so when I did blogging, I made sure that I always had an image on every single blog post. Now, you think, well, that's kind of boring. Everyone does that. But back in 2005, they were not all doing that. It was actually a very novel thing, especially in the development space, which is a lot more dry anyway, to actually have art or illustrations or even just screenshots was very unusual. And so it made us stand out. So we do the same now. Sometimes they're kind of dry like this. They come from the actual content that we've linked to here. In other cases, they're more creative. And I'm not sure if I can find the examples, but things like this and stuff, like sometimes stock photography, sometimes illustrations, sometimes very silly things and things that I've come up with, sometimes very generic things. This one actually, I came up with this and edited this JavaScript kind of box into here. So I try and get a little bit creative with that, and that's something I really enjoy actually about the job, is coming up with these bits of art. So it's the main first thing that everyone sees. And just kind of like the place that we get a lot of this stuff from is Shutterstock. I'm not going to focus too much on that, but you can search for various things and find images and whatnot, and then I just edit them into shape. So that's a kind of cool resource that we use.
Are you doing that across all of your newsletters?
You do what?
Are you doing an image at the top across all of the newsletters?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So yeah, if I bring up another one like Postgres Weekly, for example, Postgres's logo is always an elephant, so I tend to try and work an elephant into the graphic where I can. So it's a bit cutesy there, and there's for like Christmas. Yeah, there tends to be an elephant in quite a lot because people associate that with
that branding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we tend to work that in.
That's interesting. Do you feel like because they do all have a similar format that kind of helps to tie them together as part of a larger group? Like, I'm sure you have people who are subscribed to multiple.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think it's super important in that way. I don't think of them as being something like that.
So image at the top, that gives you, it sounds like that's like a part of the gig that delights you. Like,
yes, that's something I enjoy doing. It used to be someone on staff that used to do it. I took it over and then realized it was actually kind of a lot of fun. So yeah, I do enjoy doing that part. But it kind of leads us into the main item, which I always pick. One item is like the thing we're going to run at the top. Usually a slightly bigger text on the link. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but it is there. And that's, the one thing that I'm like, you should check this out because this is the big thing. So we kind of devote the top, like, I don't know, usually like the top third of an email to that type of thing. Like, these are our featured things that if you're going to ignore the rest of the issue, just check these things out. And that's where what we call the primary sponsor comes in. So that's like this company here. They've paid, for the privilege of being in that top featured section. And we do, mark it with this sponsor tag, but they control pretty much the content as long as we're, happy with them as a service and we're happy to, have them be there. That's where they appear. And that's, the main part of the email. But then, of course, it all breaks down a little bit as we go on. We've recently begun putting kind of more like bite-sized things that were more kind of like newsy things that we couldn't turn into a big feature, but that were like, oh, this thing's happened. You should probably go and have a look at this. Very quick bullet point kind of things. We don't do these in all the newsletters. This is only because JavaScript is such a big area that it makes sense. Then, like Dave with iOS Dev Weekly, we have sections. And we've tried various different formats with this over the years, but we've basically come back to a similar thing to what he does, which is where, you have this section for, this is kind of like your tutorial section. Anything that's like long that you need to read is in this section. And again, you can see sponsors are mixed in here where relevant. And then we usually close out a newsletter with more of a practical kind of code and tools section, which is, these are things that you should be using perhaps in your work rather than learning from. Sometimes we have a job section. It depends what newsletter we're on. And then in this issue, we had a correction, which is very rare. But sometimes we put a little extra thing at the end of an issue, which I know you discussed with Dave, actually. So just to give you an example, at the end of the issue before Christmas, we put in a little mystery kind of link at the end. And we didn't give any clues away as to what it was, but it's actually kind of a really cute kind of Google Chrome demo.
I like fully safe for work. I like that you included that parenthetical.
We have to do that. And we actually get thanks from people who, when, like, sometimes developers, especially famous developers, tend to curse a lot in their talks and things. And if that's particularly, it happens a lot, we will often put against the link, I haven't got an example here, but like if we're linking to a video, which we denote with this little play symbol, we say things like, well, actually, it's a podcast, but we sometimes say how long it is. But then if there's a lot of cursing or something, we'll put, like there's a lot of cursing here, or the audio quality is bad, or, we'll sometimes just put these little things in so that then people appreciate what they're going to land on. And we've had people reach out and say, oh, thanks. I was like, I'm working in the same room as my kids or whatever, and I didn't really want, someone effing and jeffing, as we say over here, while I'm trying to watch something. So
that's why I use my earbuds like at almost all times during particular meetings, because I'm like, my child can't be in the room with that, and I work in like an open concept house. Like I'm just in the back of a living room. Excellent. Okay, so
we do warn about that sort of stuff.
I like that. Now, a couple of questions that come to mind as you scroll through this. One in particular is in regards to sponsorships. And I know there's like a healthy conversation going on right now that like in addition to building a way to curate and put these together, you've also built ways to organize and keep sponsorships and like that workflow going from initial contact to booking, etc. And one thing that I don't think that I can say enough to newsletter creators is the value of editorial style sponsorships in your newsletters that are tagged as such, but that communicate in a similar approach to your organic content, which is like, this is something you may be interested in, and here is content around it. Like, this is a checklist you're showing right now. And had you not put sponsor, that could have easily been something you might have chosen to curate, right?
Yeah.
And so I was reading something earlier, I think it was on LinkedIn, and it was just like I don't know, it was just like a photo post with words on it. So a meme maybe, but there was no joke. It was just that people don't read advertising.
Right.
People read things they're interested in, and sometimes that's an ad.
Yeah.
And I think that applies here, and that people should take note. And I'm wondering if you could kind of talk us through any decisions you've made along the way regarding what types of sponsorships work best for your audiences.
So we've had a lot of success with different types of things. Sometimes it completely comes out of the blue, like it did very early on when we were running our very first sponsorships back in 2010, 2011, whenever it was. And we had this company that was trying to sell a template for like building an application using Ruby and Rails, which was what our first newsletter was about. And this idea of selling templates for apps at the time was very kind of unheard of, but there was obviously some sort of pent up demand for it, because we linked to this as a sponsor, and they literally had like, you know, over 1,000 clicks. And this is back when we had like 10,000 subscribers, or probably less. And it was like, wow, like, okay, they've, you know, got a really, really good deal on this. You know, and the other sponsors were not getting that kind of level of traction. So we were like, okay, there's certain things that resonate with our audience that perhaps we're not super in touch with, like on a day-to-day basis. So over time, you know, we've got like 10 years of data now, so we can have a little bit more of a nuanced look at what works and what doesn't. And content, I must admit, does generally work better than, you know, we've got this thing to sell, come and buy a thing. Like, that's not the best pitch, but a lot of companies do use that as a pitch. Like, that's because that's how they operate, and they've got these costs built into their marketing budget that says, look, if we spend even say $100 and we can get a customer for $100, that's a great deal for us, because there's lots of companies that are like that in our space that, you know, are operating at that kind of scale. So we have those kind of customers who, you know, don't necessarily double down on content marketing because it's just not how they operate. They've got the budget and it works. Like, just saying, we've got X, buy X.
You prompt an interesting discussion, which is for, because I'm a marketer, I'm placing ads in places, and I prefer paid social and things that send people to content, because I'm trying to establish rapport and relationship. And it makes sense to me in this optic that if you're advertising to an audience who is consuming content, that you might do well to build relationship with them by giving them more of that type of content, but not like in the friend way where you're not saying, and I don't need anything from you, but more in the like, hey, aren't we delivering this great value that's helping you? It's good content, and we sell this that could help you even more.
Yeah.
Kind of that framework for advertising in newsletters could be possibly more profitable than buy this thing now.
Maybe. I mean, I think there's room for both, because, you know, I've experienced it at both ends as a buyer as well, like as a, you know, as a consumer. Like, I see things on Instagram stories, for example, where it's like, you know, we sell this giant, you know, thing of pork rinds for $20. Like, do you want some pork rinds? And I'm like, actually, that sounds really good. And I end up going and buying some. Like, it's it can be as simple as that, and it can be old school in the sense that if there's the right copywriting, or sometimes now it's a video or something else, but that direct kind of, you know, marketing, which is like, we've got this really cool thing, here's a nice price for it, come and buy the thing. Like, I bought many a thing in that way, so it can work.
It matters what the product is,
yes,
and what stage in the relationship you're in,
yes,
right? Because I do
absolutely.
feel like sometimes B2B marketers dilute the buying process by saying, oh, you should read this, 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 and this first before you can have a talk with sales.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, we've got to qualify you through a journey of some sort. If they're ready to buy, let them talk with someone who can help them buy. Okay, so that was like a great, I feel like, distraction, but I do want to allow you to show us like where all of these curated links come from and your stance kind of on the value of quality curation.
Okay. So this is going to look like a real mess when I bring it into play. I basically got this app that I built. So this is the app here. Built this app initially about 2012. It's kind of been Frankensteined over the years and looks different over the years. This is basically our link management system.
Okay.
And this is used by several different people. We tag everything by which publication or publications we want various things to appear in. Things get various statuses. So whether something's a submission, whether it's done, which these green ones are, whether something is live, whether something is to do, whether something is to reject. We kind of have all these different statuses. And so if I go into like this item, for example, it's pretty straightforward. We have titles, we have URLs, we have descriptions of things, and then we have these different statuses of, you know, whether to reject something or keep it or whatever. And then eventually I'll make a decision about these things. And you know, this one was added by me. I didn't write this though. So someone else on the team has seen me mark this as to do. They've written this little description up, and then, you know, I can mark it as ready to go if I so wish, which actually in this case I'm going to do. I'm just going to literally go push live, and bam, that is now in a place, which I can show you here. There's now one live item in ready for this week's Ruby Weekly, which, you know, at this time of the week, that's kind of normal. Like, I don't start going through pushing things in usually until about 24 hours before the publication time, just because, you know, there might be something big that kind of knocks something else out.
Right.
So I don't want to do that like now.
Don't go creating an image that then has to be replaced. Well, so here's a good question. What gets that link to that stage? Is that manual, or is there like a plugin where if someone is on a URL that they want to include, they can snag it? Like, how does it get?
So let me give you an example. So here's a piece of content that I've just literally found just by going to Reddit, for example. Let's say, I don't I even know if I want this to go in the newsletter or not, because I've not read it yet. But let's say I have, and I think it's a good idea. Or alternatively, I actually don't know if it's a good idea, but I want someone else to go and have a look at it. What I would do is I click this bookmark clip that we've got, and it pushes it into that system. So this is, you know, it's pulled the title out, it's got the URL, it tries to pull out a bit of a description, which isn't actually that good. It'd be nice if I could put in the person's actual name. And then if I've actually written it up and I'm, you know, happy with what I've written up, I'd mark it as done, and then save it. So I think this is an opinion piece actually. I can give it a different score, so I can put it in a different place. I can also feature it in various ways. But because I don't know if this is any good, I'm going to put this as review, so that I don't know if I definitely want it in the issue. If I did, I'd say to do, like, someone else just write this up for me, please. I want it review. So basically, anyone who's got an opinion, should this go in or should it not, you can have a look at this and then either write it up or just leave it sat there and I'll come back to it at some point.
Okay.
And I would save and close, and we're done. And now if I go to Ruby and I go review, for example, that's there now sat at the top. I can push it to Twitter as well, which is probably the next thing I should get to. I can get rid of it, or I can push it live, which isn't really appropriate since I haven't written it up yet. But yeah, that's the main core of it. Like, it's not actually much more complex than that in terms of a link management.
So are you, in addition to just randomly browsing, you're using an RSS reader to go check out those links and to then use the bookmarklet to grab them? Or does the RSS feed directly into what you've built?
We used to have an RSS feed come into this system, but it just got too junked up and full of like just stuff to go through. So now what I prefer to do is keep everything separate. So whether that's using an independent RSS reader, which I very rarely do, but that sometimes is a way I can do it. We've actually got a few different systems for this. So the first one, which actually is publicly available, but it's just not very good. It's our old system, essentially. I built this system that would go through lots and lots of different feeds and things, and then basically turn them into these big, long lists of all the different links in a space that, are worth reviewing. This gets a little bit intimidating over time, and it's a little bit hard to go through, but I know people that have found these pages by accident and actually end up reading this. So, I guess it has some use to someone. So we call this the discovery system.
Okay.
But it's really, really rough, and it's just been around for years. And, it sometimes doesn't pick stuff up. Lots of types of content it just doesn't find. So recently, I've spent the last few months building a brand new system, which I can show you here, which this is somewhat more interesting. This is basically a search engine. And it crawls several hundred different sources. It crawls Twitter. It looks for signals on different social networks. It does all kinds of like bizarre things and lets me look for content that's in a specific like topic or on certain tags. So, for example, let's say that I want to see from the last 7 days, I want everything ordered by score. So good stuff at the top, going down to not so interesting stuff. Anything with a score over 2, which is not super relevant, but let's do that. And then I do my search, and it comes back immediately with things that are kind of important. So like new node releases, there's various releases here that, are significant. As you can see, I've already looked at some of these because, they're marked in a different color. But I just find so much stuff by going through these with different types of search, as I need something. So if I need to have a code project that is, let's say, a Ruby project that is a GitHub repo, so that's like an open source project. I want something that came out in the last 2 days. I could do this, and it will find me a bunch of releases on things that came out in the last couple of days. So I can fill up spare spaces that I have or lacks that I have in my content in that way. And I have then another system that's kind of on top of that, that is called, it's basically our search system over all of our previous issues. So if I've found a link, so let's just pick one of these. Let's pick this link here. If I end up at this URL again and I've forgotten whether it was in a previous issue or not, I can click this button and it shows me that we linked to this 24 days ago in a particular issue. So this allows me, when a new release of like a major project has come out, I can be like, I'm sure I linked to that like 2 or 3 years ago. I can then click on that link. It'll say, yes, you linked to it 2 or 3 years ago. And then I can kind of add to the conversation that I had last time about it. So I can say, oh, since, we linked to it 2 years ago, it's now doing this, this, and this. So,
yeah, that's great. It's like you've got context now.
Yes. That's one of the main things that we add. Like, I've seen a lot of newsletters that follow a similar format to ours, but what they do is they automatically just scrape like the first sentence and then just put that underneath. like in this kind of area. They just put like the first sentence or two, and it's, so it will say like, here's an article, and it will say, oh, the other day I was playing with X, Y, and Z, and I did this, this, and this. And it's like the newsletter creator didn't write that. They're just including what someone else has said.
So it's kind of a little bit lazy curation at that point, because you're not adding your own personality or take, or at least brand voice.
Yeah. I don't want to link to any people that do that, because, some people actually do a reasonable job of it, but it's not what we do. And so with certain,
I just found out something like miraculous the other day.
Go on.
And I'm laughing at myself that I didn't know this, but then I also am like now aware that we need to communicate this better for Curated. And that is that when you use the Chrome extension or the bookmarklet or and bring a link in, whatever text you have highlighted at that moment immediately goes into the body copy.
Right.
I did not know this. It was nowhere on our like help documentation or anything. And so I was like,
those little features. Yeah,
I was like, this is actually amazing, right? I would love to extend that to podcasts or something, and to be able to capture timestamps of like, if I listen to the whole podcast and I'm telling you, you should, I'd love to say like, you want to pay attention at this particular point, and like this is where it gets juicy kind of thing. So lots of fun discoveries to be made there. But I think you're right. Sometimes the meta content that someone provides is not enough to justify why it's in your particular newsletter.
That comes into play a lot more with, say, this newsletter that I've linked to, which is one all about databases. So the thing about databases is, if you're into databases in any way or another, like generally you'd be into one or two. Like you would know the one that you use, you would know all about everything that does, but you're not really paying attention to other ones that are in the space. So if you subscribe to a newsletter to find out what is going on in the broader industry, it's not useful if someone just links to something and says, oh, there's a new version of such and such a database. Wow. Like, you need someone to say, there's a new version of this other database that does all these various things, and this is probably why you should use it, or why other people use it, and kind of provide some context as to why you're linking to this thing. Because just the fact that a new release of something has come out is not interesting in itself. You want to know what that thing is for people that have never heard of it before, but also why it's relevant in the broader picture, which that is the thing that is really hard to add, and means that you need to understand the space. So databases is an example where, I've got that knowledge and I've been in the space for long enough to do that, but it can be tricky.
Well, then let's focus on that for a second, because I think a lot of people might need to hear this. The more closely you or the person who is creating the newsletter that you publish, the more closely they can relate to the recipient audience, the more they are going to be able to engage with that audience, because they are putting themselves in the mental headspace of the recipient and understanding what that recipient needs to know to consume that content.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about lazy curation, I think that sometimes we run into someone's putting out a newsletter and they're just grabbing links and dumping them into a newsletter and like going, surely my audience will think this is important because it contains keyword X.
Right.
And that the cream rises to the top. And I'm sure you've seen that happen in the newsletters you edit, or the writers or editors you choose to assist you, that there is a distinction between pulling together a group of links and pulling together and curating exactly what that audience will find relevant at the time of it being sent to them.
Yeah. I mean, you could just automate something that is like the other thing that we're talking about. You could basically build a system that just goes and looks for any blog posts that have, been written using certain keywords, and then we'll just put the links into a newsletter and bam, send. And some of those things exist, but they don't really provide for the reader. So, something that I'm trying to do is actually not look like a computer, because sometimes if you look at a curated newsletter like this, you could think, this is just all pulled together by a machine, and the summaries are just pulled from the article. that's where things like the graphic and, putting, sometimes this isn't a good example of a newsletter where we have like different content blocks, but sometimes we have, like screenshots, and we'll have a little interview pop up, we'll have a quote. Quotes are something we're starting doing a lot more now. It kind of basically just proves that we're not an AI doing this. And that seems to be actually a broader trend in the world of work and content production generally, which is that we're all trying to look human, and we don't want to look like an AI putting something together.
Right. There's true value in, I think, like, yes, if you can teach someone what categories they might expect to receive in your newsletters, that's great. You're teaching them this is what I deliver, but that there is additional value beyond that to not being so formulaic that you become too expected.
Yeah.
That there's like an advantage to preview text, subject lines, things that actually indicate like we had a brain in a person's head think through this and decide that this was the flavor of this content, this particular issue.
Yeah. People are really sensitive to that on social media, and especially Twitter as well, where, I'm aware of different like news companies, like, mass media news companies that have millions of followers on Twitter. And yet whenever they put their like automated posts up, they get like 3 or 4 likes. And it's just like, it just shows you the poor engagement that they have. So actually, I'm just going to give you an example. This is the one that I usually pull up. This is one of the most popular newspapers in the UK. They have 1.8 million followers. So I'm definitely not punching down with this. They're absolutely huge. If you go in and look at a random, thing, they've got some likes and stuff, but for the amount of people they've got following their account, 7 likes. That one's got quite a few actually, because it's got a picture of Donald Trump in it. But you see what I mean? Like, everyone's got 2 likes, and yet they've got 1.7 million followers. And so people are really sensitive to this on social media. They know that a machine just basically took a post off of their site and just pushed it out there. There's no extra insight. There's no humor. Of course, people dying of COVID isn't humorous, but you get what I mean. Like, there's no broader context or story to like or retweet. It's just like, here's a link, go click on it. And that's all it's saying.
I think brands that harness, if they can get a CEO or a thought leader who is tied to their brand to be posting to a personal account, like especially on LinkedIn, that they see so much more engagement and brand awareness because of that person's ability to be human on that platform versus their brand accounts, which the algorithms do not favor. Right? Because they're not advertising, they're trying to post organic.
I mean, that's definitely true of companies, but it's also true of newsletters as well. And that's actually kind of perhaps one of my slight flaws. So, obviously everyone's heard of Morning Brew and what they do. But actually, if you look at their different Twitter presences, it's generally like the CEO and the founder, and there's the woman that runs a podcast for them and stuff like that. Like, all of their Twitter accounts are buzzing a lot more than the central kind of, brand account from my point of view.
They're pulling back that curtain.
Yeah.
They're doing what you talked about doing, which is bringing people along for the ride. As you write a book about Rails, you're writing a blog about it. And that feels more real time and relevant and consumable, I would even argue.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've built a search engine. Nobody can buy it. You have ways of keeping up with the content that is very important to your readers.
Yeah.
Do you have subscribers? Okay, I have 2 questions. I'm going to try to take it down to just one because I tend to ask 2 at once and then look at you like, which one are you going to answer? Do people subscribe to multiple newsletters, and is there a way to do that at one time?
So we have a mechanism for that, but it's not a very good one. We kind of upsell people sometimes. So if you subscribe to JavaScript Weekly, for example, we kind of have this thing on the back end. Let me actually bring this up on a different screen and actually have a go at doing this. So I'm preparing on one screen and then typing on another, which is interesting. Right. So
I
let me
get
drag
all
this
kinds of
across.
confused when I try to do that kind of thing. Like,
Here we go. So I've just created this junk extra account that I can subscribe with. I click subscribe. That will send me the confirmation email. But then we've also got these other kind of upsells to other newsletters that relate to that, JavaScript one.
nice.
So if someone clicks, on this, it basically is a bonus subscription, and same for that one. So there is a basic upsell capability, but it's not something we do just, like broadly on everything.
Okay.
So we try and keep them as separate publications as much as we can. So when I talk about that we've got over 500,000 subscribers, obviously some of those are across different titles. It's a bit like, if a magazine publisher had 10 magazines, they'd say we've got 500,000, but obviously that might be, 50,000 buying 10 magazines all once. Like, our ratio isn't that bad by any means, but that's just how we count it. A very old school way of counting the numbers, I think.
Okay. And then my next question kind of feeds into what we just talked about is, do you have sponsors who sponsor multiple newsletters?
Yes. So, a key part of the efficiency of running a company that publishes 12, 13, 14, whatever it is, newsletters, is that we have basically one sales force essentially, and because there's so much correlation between the newsletters and the topics and so on, companies will often come along and say, we want to be in this and this. Like, we've always grown more and succeeded more when we add more newsletters rather than just growing one bigger and bigger, because I don't know, it just gives more variety. And there's only so far you can go with that. Like, I couldn't imagine running like 100, 200 different newsletters, but by virtue of having more than one, at least, it allows us to cater for a much bigger audience. And sometimes they'll pay to be in one, but then have an experiment in another. So they'll say, we'll buy lots of inventory in newsletter A, but we'll run a few test units in newsletter B because it's not exactly our audience. Let's see how it goes. Then it works out quite well, and then they end up sponsoring two. So, it can work out really well.
Right, because now you can sell more spots in more places to people who you've earned trust with elsewhere. So it's like growing that relationship and understanding where they may or may not do well on it.
Pretty much.
I love testing. Like, that's yes. Okay, so I'm trying to think where this naturally leads us next. You have shown us your bookmarklet. You have shown us the very dev interface of how these get put together. Can you walk us through like the rest of the workflow before something becomes an issue, and what that looks like to your team, and then how that is finalized, and kind of talk to us about decisions you made about how you built this and any adaptations that you kind of saw needed to be made to the workflow? I think we're all like, how do we save time but do things effectively, like those kinds of things.
I think it's the more people you add into a process, that's when the tooling changes and the processes change, because it's easy to keep things in your head, but then when you need to keep things in multiple heads and synchronize those things, that's where life becomes a bit more tricky. So something that we moved towards using for our weekly, like, what newsletters are we sending, where are the relevant things and checks that we need to do and keep track of all of that, is in our Airtable, which this is a very basic view of what it looks like this week. Very empty because we've not done anything. But it basically shows us the publication date, the titles that we've got, the issue numbers, and links to various editors, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Along with various checks as well, like, did all the items get archived? Have we got a local backup of it? Did we put stuff onto Facebook, Twitter, and all that type of thing? So we pretty much live in here for the week, and it just updates slowly as we accomplish each task. It's kind of almost like a checklist to a certain extent, because did sales check the issue or not? Certain people in the sales team did or didn't, and so on. So that's kind of important to us. But then the next step of this, if I click into an issue, this actually brings up our editor. So this is a very empty issue at the moment because there's just a few things been pushed into it, that are kind of backlogged or whatever. But the way that we code these is, from what I understand, it reasonably unique. So lots of different people, if in our company, can bring this page up at the same time, and it's interactive and it updates on everyone's screen in real time. So I can work on an issue live with multiple people on my team, and we can do work at the same time.
Which terrifies me. Like,
yeah.
it's totally cool in a Google Doc, but if you let me in some code and you say it's not like going to be attributed that I wrecked the code.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of like not exactly, this is not the pure HTML or whatever that goes out. This is kind of a weird hybrid kind of XML, HTML kind of format that we built that allows us to be as semantic as we need to be, but without, having to build like hundreds of tables and all that kind of stuff. And also allows us to produce the plain text version in a, efficient kind of way. So we can easily click on text and see what the plain text version looks like, which is actually quite important to us because, again, developers, that's sort of what they want to, sometimes they want to subscribe to that version, and that actually is a problem, something we have to deal with. Can also do other cool things here, like I can look at what the issue will look like in an iPhone kind of width, or just our flexible kind of normal width. But if you see, if I update things on the left here, even the actual name of the publication, if I was going to change that to Opt-in Weekly, for example, I can do that, and it all updates in real time on the right-hand side here. And that's pretty much true of everything that is in the issue. I can remove an item, just that block there, that's now gone. I can move it around. I could put it here, for example. And in the company, we're used to doing this all the time. We can put in raw code in certain areas. So, for example, this is the block that you see here. So I can randomly, change the size of various things, or, the background of certain things with, raw stuff in there, and it just all works. And so this allows us to be perhaps a little bit more creative than some people who are like forced in maybe like a Substack template. We don't have that issue. Like, we can just live code random things and just put them into the issue and be as dynamic as we like.
You're the exact, like the other opposite end of that spectrum, because you have full customization capability right there.
Yeah. And we can push it up to our website. So if I don't know why we call it M-based. There was some reason for this, some historical reason, but we now just use this as a verb in the company. M-based basically means to push a newsletter up to the relevant website. And so, for example, I could take actually an issue of the latest issue of JavaScript Weekly. I could make a change to it. Let's say put exclamation mark in the title there. I can go M-base. And then what I will do is I will go and show you just how that actually has taken effect. So there's JavaScript Weekly, and you can see it's got the exclamation mark on, and it's all updated in every single place that it needs to be. So that's the level of control we want, level of control we need, and that's pretty much how it works. And then, of course, there's a system behind that for actually handling the send and doing the testing and stuff, but it's very, very dull. It all works at the command prompt. It's all, basically a command line application that we use to handle all of this. There's no, like MailChimp or Sendy or anything like that that's doing a cute kind of interface. It's all pretty much, developer-y, but that kind of fits our, brand, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, always raw on the back end because you understand the back end. You're not a me who like kind of hazes over when developer speak gets like outside of my very limited vernacular. So one question that came to mind that I think you might be able to help newsletter creators think about, because you've got years in the industry, is this concept of what makes a solid launch, and then and I don't want to lead you into your answer, but I would like for you to address kind of this idea of patience with audience growth and patience with monetization, because I think we have a lot of new newsletter creators out there who are very hungry to monetize quickly, and that there's nothing wrong with that, but that there is also a camp that says like, become what you're going to become before you sell it. So kind of advice in that realm, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I'm not like, hugely skilled at launches. Like, I've done really well at it, to be fair, but it's often by luck or by the fact that I've already built up an audience. So as I said earlier, the reason that I managed to get 1,800 subscribers in the first 48 hours was because I had the most popular Ruby blog. And, the reason I had the most popular Ruby blog is because I'd spent years building that. So when I see people that are in the various newsletter, Facebook groups and things like that, and they're saying, oh, I've launched my newsletter and I've got 5 subscribers and I just can't get that traction. I'm always thinking like, well, if you'd launched a blog or if you'd launched a podcast or, even when you joined Facebook, like where are the people that you want to be associated with or to follow you or whatever, where are they coming from? It's not a newsletter specific issue by any means. It's an attention issue generally. So that's something that I've always been aware of just with the publisher brain, is that I'm always thinking about where are these kind of assets of like trust that I've built up or goodwill or whatever that then turn into subscribers in various things that I might want to launch. So, that's why I didn't launch a newsletter about, say, just general tech news, for example, because that's not where my people and my followers and whatever are at. They're developers and they want purely development stuff. So that's why I've succeeded with that, as opposed to, doing a, blog or a podcast or a newsletter about tennis or wrestling or, some other thing. So
now I want you to do a wrestling newsletter.
Exactly. I mean, I know nothing about wrestling, so it would be a complete failure. But again, though, I probably could apply now, having learned some things over the years, some general concepts as to how I would approach that type of thing. Because this format, you see here, this could apply to wrestling. It'd probably be a bit more graphical, but more photography and stuff like that. But I could launch a newsletter about wrestling, and I would, think about what communities I was going to go and get involved with and pay attention to. And a lot of it is like the old, like the Gary Vaynerchuk kind of style of, throw yourself into a community, contribute, keep giving, and then eventually you can kind of, reap the rewards of that goodwill that you've built up. Or, you could go the kind of the other route, which is you could just run like a Facebook ad or something, take some capital that you've got. If you've got like $1,000 and you're like, how many subscribers can we get for this $1,000? Build up an ad campaign on Facebook or in a complimentary newsletter. So with my wrestling, surely there's some kind of newsletter that's about that culture that's around, comic books, wrestling, all that kind of like area. Is there something complimentary I could promote in? Say, yep, there's a daily wrestling newsletter coming out, come and sign up. There's probably a way of doing it. But then, of course, you've used the capital instead of the community goodwill. So you always need something, like starting from absolute zero, you're always going to be on zero. You need something. So it's either time that you're investing, money, or you've got this goodwill already.
Right. And I think like right now, if you were launching new, it's going to require a hybrid of those two things, like organic and paid to some extent. You sell sponsorships. You've been selling them for years. Paid newsletters is now a big thing, like paid to subscribe. Do you run any as pay to subscribe?
No.
Okay. And how have you come to the decisions that you have made, and where do you feel like newsletter publishing is going, especially as a media group type owner, in terms of those two different revenue models?
So I don't pay for any newsletters either. So I can't, if I don't understand what it is that if I'm not interested in buying something, I'm going to find it hard to understand how to sell it. And I pay for numerous podcasts and I kind of understand that and I get the psychology of it. I've just not found any emails that I actually want to put up money for. Like, I don't know, maybe that just sounds weird. I'm not one of these people that has done that. So I had a call with Hamish, and I can't remember the other founder's name, but from Substack. Oh, it must have been about nearly 2 years ago now, or whenever they were just beginning, and they were like wanting to bring me on board as like, you should try this. You've got all these subscribers. If you convert whatever percent, like 4 or 5%, $10 a month, well, you take hundreds of thousands of people I've got, like that's going to be a lot of money per month. So I thought thought it was going to be an easy sell on me. And I'm just like, I have no idea what I would want to, what I could offer that needs that extra value. Like, you know, and I have enough time, like, sorry, not enough time to do what I do now, let alone adding this extra thing in. So it's basically like a new business from scratch, and I'm not in the mood for a new business. So they were like, fair enough, you know, whatever. I was like, good luck, and you know, look forward to seeing how it grows. And they've grown very, grown very, very well. But you see, the ones that are doing the most successful on Substack are journalists and columnists mostly, that have built up that goodwill, and they know a beat, and they can put together a really good story, and you know, they're threading things together, and they've done very, very well. It's not necessarily curators per se that have done very well with paid newsletters, just in my experience. And that's where my skill is. So just to relay that onto the second part of your question, which is more about where I see things going, is I see things going in all the ways. So it's, I love that. I'm one of these people that likes to look at unrelated areas in life and see things that are happening in one space, and then use that as a metaphor, or kind of translate that into where I am. So that sounds confusing, but let's say I'm looking at podcasting, for example. Podcasting's a little bit ahead of us in some ways, in terms of it. It was like about a year or 2 years ago that everyone was launching a podcast, and, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. And I think we're actually starting to kind of come down off of that high slightly at the moment, in a way that email is not. So I think that's going to be happening next to us, is that everyone's saying, launch an email, launch an email, launch an email. And then people are just going to fizzle out. They're not going to publish them. They're going to give up. They're going to get back to their day jobs or whatever, especially once this lockdown's over. They're not going to have enough time indoors sitting writing all day. They're going to get back to life, and we're going to notice a lot fizzle out.
Yeah, but the strong will survive.
The strong will survive. Yeah. It's like magazine publishing. We've seen that happen. If you look at magazine sales or newspaper sales as well, they've gone down, 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 down over the years. But there are still publications that are going up, up, up. And they tend to be the things that are on the very bottom end of the market. So, you know, what you would call the gutter press. So, you know, we call them red top tabloids here, but things that, you know, like National Enquirer type, trashy type things. And then at the very high end, you have things like Monocle magazine is a good example of this. Perhaps things like the Economist, like high-end, highfalutin kind of magazines, where the sales have either gone up or they found new models. So like the New York Times has found these new digital models where they're actually going up in revenue over time.
And the Economist is using newsletters to drive subscriptions to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we do see quality, and also the complete lack of quality, like the, you know, really cheap stuff to pump out. There's success stories. People are going to come, people are going to go. I think what we're measuring when we're looking at things being a fad or being, you know, kind of on a downtrend, is you're kind of looking at the average of what's going on in a space, but you're not looking at the individual stories and the individual sub kind of niches of something. So email is going to survive either way.
Okay. So then this begs a new question, which we can stop screen sharing unless you have something else hidden.
Do you have? No, I don't think I do. No.
Okay. So this will be like maybe my last big question, is kind of this idea of curation, which you've built your group off of. Like all of your newsletters are curated content, right?
Yeah.
But curated the way an art museum would curate something, not the way an aggregate, like let's just toss all these keywords in and churn out something would do. And lately I'm seeing a trend towards there's so much that's being created that we need a curator to come in and bring in the best, so that we don't have to, as the general public, sift through all of this if we want the very best of something. So first of all, your thoughts on the future of curation. And then I have an idea after you talk about that I don't want to forget to mention, and that we can kind of pitch back and forth, since we seem to be in brainstorm mode as part of this interview. Okay, so curation versus creation, why you chose what you chose, and where you think those are going.
I mean, curation has a incredibly long history. Just producing a cookbook is curation. You know, running a newspaper is curation on the part of the editor, and you know the viewpoints they want to put across. So, you know, I do see them as being, they're distinct concepts, but they often overlap. So, you know, I can curate together a bunch of links, but then not even necessarily include those links. I can learn from something and then write my own opinion, which is built up, is basically a curation of ideas, and then say, I think this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And there's a lot of people out there who've made a lot of money from doing this, like Dan Gruber of Daring Fireball. He's big in the tech space, earns a lot of money running paid podcasts and things of that nature. And all he does is just express his opinion on Apple releases and Macs and stuff like that. And he's kind of got to that point. But some people look at him and say, oh, you know, he's producing this content, but really he's just curating ideas and putting them into his own mold. And I don't, you know, that's historically existed for many, many years, you know, pre-internet, and it's going to continue forevermore. So I understand why people talk about them as separate concepts, but I don't see curation necessarily being separate to the creation thing. You can create content off of the back of your curation, which is what we're seeing with these emails. But maybe I've missed the gist of your question.
No, I think that's a valid point, that some of the best curators are actually, like, they're creating. I think where I was going is this build it from scratch yourself.
Right.
Like the writers you speak of who have editorial followings, who are writing a newsletter that is not curated content, but they are actually going out and researching. If they're a great reporter, they're bringing in the ideas or the context of what's going on. So
that's
then
journalism.
Yes, that's my background, which is kind of why I've landed in this chair that I'm swiveling in. So the idea that I want us to like conceive right here is, should there be a curated newsletter of original newsletters?
Wow. Yeah, there could be. You know, one of the podcasts I listen to actually takes that kind of tack. You know, they do it for comedy reasons, but you could, you know, go and listen to different pieces of different things. You could do it with email. I don't think the community is big enough for that to quite work with email. Like, because you kind of need to know who all the players are. You know, I could understand it being perhaps in a celebrity niche where you are saying, like, you know, I'm going to curate, and this is what the National Enquirer and things essentially do. Like, I'm going to curate all the most ridiculous things that celebrities have said this week and boil them down into this one thing. Well, there's a business in that because everyone knows who, you know, Kylie Jenner is and what all these different people.
Right.
It's a little bit difficult with email because even though there are some names, you know, that are known in the space, I could probably bring out some really big names in email that you wouldn't have heard of, and you could do the same to me because they've all got such small audiences. Like if you've got 50,000, 100,000 subscribers, there's a lot of non-overlapping audience points. You know, like I could say some of the most biggest developer bloggers, and you know, like no one's ever going to have heard of them other than if you're in this space. So yeah, I don't think I think that would really struggle.
I think you'd have to stay in the niches. It'd have to be, you're right.
You need a lane.
Okay, so then I think that is like the lesson we will close on, that I think the history of your content curation, creation, evolution into newsletter, and then newsletter group, which I was talking with someone recently about, like why she didn't want to call it a media group,
right,
but a newsletter business. And maybe that there's some like stigma with the word media that
I'm not aware of that, but okay.
Like it was just like this kind of like decision that even though she's building a media group, she wanted it to feel more like I'm bundling newsletters, and like we're trying to psychologically figure out what the aversion to the word might be.
Right.
But the point I am eventually going to try to drive home here is that knowing your topic, knowing your audience and the way they will receive that topic, and staying in that niche lane is likely to be much more beneficial mentally. You will enjoy creating the image that goes in there. You will enjoy the process, which I think is important, because the money is not going to just like leap into your pocketbook the second you publish. So I think we're just agreeing here that staying niche, staying what you know, is like a good trajectory. So then I think to round it out, I'm going to say, what is it that you thought you would be doing as a career when you began in development?
Well, I was originally intending to be a lawyer when I was at school, so that's, completely different from there. And then I thought I was going to be a freelance journalist, which I was very, very briefly. It's funny because I've always programmed throughout my life, but it was never something I intended to do as a job. It was something I've always enjoyed doing, so I didn't necessarily want that to be a job. Which is probably a bit of a weird way to go about it. But it wasn't a big job at the time. Like nowadays, everyone in America, Amazon or whatever, seems to be earning $500,000 a year. But it wasn't ever perceived in that way, like 20, 25 years ago. Like it was like, it's just a job. You're not going to get rich doing this. So yeah, I'm not a planner though. Like sometimes I'll have a general idea of, I'll steal an idea from someone. So like with the newsletters, an idea that I stole was from Mark Zuckerberg, which was his whole launch strategy for Facebook, where he went from one college to another college that had lots of people in common, to another college, to another college. I've done that with topics. So I began with Ruby. There's a lot of JavaScript developers who do Ruby. There's a lot of people who do databases that are in both. And I've built this kind of like massive Venn diagram of publications. And I just randomly steal ideas. I don't sit and think about, I'm going to do this in 10 years time. Now I've got to this point now where I've been running the business for 10 years and I can start thinking like, okay, we've got these resources and this capital behind us. And how do I want to have this play out? Like, where do I see this going? But it's really hard for me. It's not how my brain works. I'm not a planner. I am a very much, I'm in the river, just sailing along,
maybe that's
being pushed.
Maybe that's a blessing though, because then you're not changing your idea to accommodate the new. Like
that's
you
true,
are actually ready for it to happen.
Like an Elon Musk or, a Steve Jobs or whatever, which is their visionary. I've got this vision. I'm aiming for that, screw everyone else type thing. Like I'm more of a, I see this working, let's adapt this. I see this working, let's adapt this. And then kind of just, I'm an adapter. I'm a magpie.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it's interesting that you were freelance journalist and now you, through development, have like combined that passion, that knowledge of development with newsletters, which I would call journalism.
Yeah. I mean, if I had any one piece of advice for anyone, it would be that if you can find multiple things that you're good at, and I like to think of this in like a kind of a graph kind of form. So, you're good at programming, you're good at writing, let's say. Well, how many people are good at programming and writing? You're kind of in that point where these two things meet. If you can find a point like that where I'm really good at, I don't know, let's say you've got an amazing voice, like a speaking voice, which I don't, but there's some people that have this amazing radio kind of quality voice. And you're into, I don't know, like wrestling. We talked about that earlier. And you've got a good sense of humor. Well, maybe you should be running a podcast about wrestling because you've got a good sense of humor, you've got the right voice, and you're interested in wrestling. Like, find where those connections are between things that you've got. Don't just think, I'm interested in, I don't know, makeup. So I'm going to launch an email newsletter about makeup. And I'm just going to keep posting about makeup. Like, what is the other element that you've got that you're good at? Is it that you've got a good eye for seeing when someone else has got good makeup? In which case your newsletter shouldn't be just about makeup. It should be about, here's a person with great makeup on and why. Like, how can you narrow down?
Yes. Well, zone in on the intersection of your strongest skills and your strongest interests.
And there's less competition at those points.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. I have taken up more of your time than I intended, but I have enjoyed like every moment of it. When you look at this on YouTube, look in the description below. I'm going to have links for my developers who are watching to all of the Cooperpress newsletters and additionally to Cooperpress just in general. And we would love if you have questions for you to ask them in the comments. If they're for Curated or Opt-in Weekly, I'll chime in, but I will gladly go nag Peter and say like, hey, someone has a great question. And we would love to get just like a little conversation going there as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for being gracious with your time and educating us newsletter creators on the insights that you have gained over the years.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.